Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Today, we're going to start our video with a story about our beloved Karen. It's been a long time since she was in our stories. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, if you're new here, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. Have fun failing the test. This happened in 2018. My husband and I own a company that works with companies to provide doctors and nurses for factories and construction, OSHA, and first aid training, and some other things. One of our major accounts is a power company. We not only provide on-site personnel, but also train them on first aid. This particular company is very strict on their health and safety protocols. They require all their crews to have an up-to-date first aid certificate, and they had shelled a decent amount of money to equip each of their sites, including their offices, with 2 AEDs, automatic electric discharger. We were also required to provide an adjusted training for their staff and crews. Because of the nature of the job, we trained them in 3 hours, 2 days schedule. 1 day was theory, because in a factory environment, instead of ABC, you learn EABC, with a written test at the end, and the next day was practical exam. We were scheduled for a 2-day training with this company. We were told it would be a small class, around 40 people, so I booked myself and our senior trainer. We arrived for the training, set up, get the roll call, and there was when it happened. Cast: John is our senior trainer, Karen is a very important person, Whack is me, and Paul is COO. As I said, this company is very hardcore on their health and safety, except for the crews. They require every person that has even the slightest chance of visiting a power plant to have a current first aid certificate. This means we trained a lot of suits. As the room is filling up, I noticed John talking with a woman I didn't know. The conversation is heated, and I approach to see what's happening. Whack: Is everything okay? Karen: No, it's not. As I was saying to this man, I don't need to take this class. I did first aid in my previous company, and I have very important work to do. John: As I explained, madam, we follow the company policies about training. But I already know everything. Whack: Madam, your manager booked you for the class. He probably thinks it's more important than anything else. No, I'm very high in the company. If you don't release me immediately, you may lose your contract. At that point, she looked at us with crossed arms and a smug face. John, being a no-nonsense former trainer for the Army's Medic Corps, was ready to explode. Cue malicious compliance. There was a rule for training set by the company that any personnel that could provide an up-to-date certificate could sign a waiver for the person training, but they had to take the test. I quickly provided this option to Karen. She wasn't completely happy, but she took it. I explained there were 2 tests, one in writing, one practical. She said fine, and to notify her when it was time to take them. So 2.5 hours later, she's sitting to take the written test. Immediately, I can see she's struggling. Since most of the questions are tailored for an industrial setting, the test ends and we collect the papers. At a quick glance, I knew she had at best passed with a very low grade. Despite her struggling in theory, she just came for the test the next day. In this case, I knew she was going to fail. Along with their normal CPR, we had added in AED training, per company rules, and despite being a fairly easy and straightforward machine to use, she had serious trouble. So we pack up, go back to base, we rate the tests, and as expected, she was the only one who'd failed both spectacularly. From the rest 39 people, only one had failed the written test. We sent the results and certificates to the company. Aftermath. Monday morning, just after we opened, I got a call from Paul, the company's COO. He's one of our major contacts because training was part of his responsibilities. The call went like this. Paul: Good morning, Whack. I'm calling about the results of the training. Whack: Good morning, Paul. I had a feeling you'd call. Paul: Can you tell me why my assistant COO failed? Whack: Is Karen your assistant? Paul: Yes. Whack: Well, she said she had very important work to do and already had a certificate, and she signed the waiver. Paul: Of course she did. I could hear the frustration in his voice. Paul: Can we arrange a quick training for today, if you want to do it? Whack: Let me check. It has to be a late one, otherwise tomorrow at 10. Paul, after some thinking: Tomorrow then. See you at the office. The next day rolls up, and at 10 sharp, I'm at the offices. I'm led to a conference room, glass all around, and told to wait. A few minutes later, Paul and Karen step into the room. She looks chastised. She sat across from me while Paul stood. Paul asked for the waiver, which I handed to him. He took a look at it and gave it back. Paul: as I explained when you were hired, you had to pass this training. The certificate you gave us was coming up, and you came from a different field. Now, do the training properly and pass it. It's one of the prerequisites for the job. Karen took the training properly this time and passed. Since then, she's never complained about first aid training. And our second story. Fences make good neighbors. Not always. So this story isn't mine. It isn't even my friend's. But it is the tale of a battle of two neighbors that lived in my friend's neighborhood when he was a kid. Neighbor number one we'll call Hans. He was German, and his family came here in the 1950s for a better life. Hans had 2 kids, and the whole family was large. German food can really pack on the weight, and apparently Hans' family loved to eat. Neighbor number 2 we'll call Robert. He was also from Europe and had emigrated at roughly the same time. I don't know what part of Europe Robert was from, but apparently there was some sort of history there because Robert absolutely hated Germans, and Hans in particular. The two of them lived one street over from each other, and their backyards faced each other, separated by a wooden fence that was falling apart. So were the fences that separated Hans from his neighbors on either side. Hans decided to replace the fences. He was able to get the cooperation of his next-door neighbors, as they weren't happy with the state of the fences either, and agreed to split the cost of replacing them. But when Hans approached Robert, he was told there was no way he was paying a dime to a effing kraut to fix the fence. Hans reasonably explained that the fence would improve both homes and that it was only fair that the cost be split between them. Robert told Hans to go to hell, and if he wanted a new fence, he could pay for the whole thing himself. So Hans decided to do just that. According to my friend, Hans had his lot surveyed not once but twice to determine the exact location of the property line. Then he had his new fence built on all 3 sides, but the fence separating Hans and Robert was built 3 to 4 feet into Hans' yard. He also installed a gate. This was done in the fall. Robert's wife was an avid gardener and landscaper, and of course in the spring she planted some elaborate gardens. Revenge Stage 1. In the early summer, Hans and his son went through the gate and started ripping up all the flowers Robert's wife had planted next to the fence. Robert, of course, freaks out and starts screaming at Hans, who screams back, and eventually the cops were called by Robert, who wanted Hans charged with trespassing and destruction of the flowers. Hans takes the cops back to his place and shows them the surveys and measures the distance from the house to the fence. He then explains that he owns the property that the flowers were planted on. What appears to be Robert's yard is actually Hans' property for a couple of feet past the fence, and that if anyone should be charged with trespassing, it should be Robert. The cops are pretty much forced to agree and have the unpleasant task of explaining to Robert that he is not permitted to come within 3 feet of the fence in what appears to be his own yard, but isn't. Revenge Stage 2. Robert was a very sociable guy, often having guests over for backyard parties and gatherings on weekends. Hans had taken careful measurements to the inch and had replaced the flower garden with patio blocks. The next time Robert hosted a get-together, Hans and his family decided to get some sun. They set up lawn chairs on the patio blocks and, in full view of Robert's guests, decided to lounge in the sun in their yard. Remember how I described Hans as large? Picture a couple of pasty, overweight sunbathers in undersized swimwear in full view of your guests. Naturally, Robert loses his crap, and in the argument makes some threats. Cops get called again, and Robert is warned to keep his temper in check. Revenge Part 3. Robert is a very religious Catholic, and Hans doesn't really follow any religion. There are some dates that are very important in Catholicism, like First Communion and Confirmation and such, and in Robert's culture, the parents host a party afterward. Everyone is dressed very nicely, and it's a classy event. Hans put some small gargoyles on top of his fence posts and some other decor on his fence to give it an ominous and evil appearance. He put a wrought iron table set on the patio, a black tablecloth, and a couple of goblets and black candles on the table. This sort of caused the celebration to be a bit subdued, and Robert couldn't do a damn thing about it. These sort of things took place over the course of years, not all at once. Robert did stuff too, like damaging the fence, throwing stuff over it into Hans' yard. It was pretty much war, and both sides got their shots in. Final revenge. One day, Hans was driving down Robert Street and saw a for sale sign in Robert's yard. Finally, Robert was leaving. Hans couldn't resist getting in one last dig. So he painted the side of the fence facing Robert's property in the most hideous shade of day-glow orange. It didn't take long for the real estate agent to approach Hans after Robert had to explain that, no, he couldn't change the color of the fence. Hans explained everything to the agent, the history of the animosity between them, and that, no, he wasn't going to repaint the fence. If it made the house harder to sell, too bad. If it drove the value down, too bad. The agent proposed a solution. Robert could buy an easement of the property, thus gaining access to the strip of land beside the fence and the entitlement to paint his side of it. Hans refused but offered to sell the easement to the new buyers only if Robert paid up front for Hans's lawyer fees to draw up the contract as an add-on to the contract of sale to Robert's house. The price he demanded was many times the actual cost of the fence and came off the top of the market value of Robert's house. Eventually, Robert sold his house and left for parts unknown. Hans actually ended up getting along very well with the new buyers, and they were known to socialize through the gate to their respective backyards. And our last story. The story of how my great-uncle pulled the reverse Uno on his beggar wife and children. So my great-uncle was this super cool dude. Air Force, worked on the fire service and on the rails. Took a 1929 car and redid it when he was 80. Basically every little kid's dream because of his stories and stuff. Anyways, great-uncle had begun to have health issues in his older years. This made him less active and therefore at home more, which made him grouchy. His wife and kids began openly discussing in front of him how they wanted him gone so they could sell off his stuff for money, how they knew he had a big inheritance waiting for them, and they wanted it ASAP. Well, I'm sitting there in the other room next to Uncle hearing all this, and he turns to me and just goes, "That's what they think. Minute those cretins started wishing me dead, I rewrote my will, and none of them are in it. They have money. I'm giving my wife enough to live off for 1 year, and the rest is for my funeral and to charities of my choice." Well, Uncle died later that year at 98 years old. It was a crap storm because everyone was expecting to get hundreds of thousands each, and there wasn't one of them who got $1. My great-aunt got something like $5,000. Kids didn't get anything. He bought himself the most expensive casket the funeral home sold and a mausoleum just for him. I love that man. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.